Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. I like games more than movies, at least in the current year. I'm recording this in 2024, but the truth is, I have felt this way for a really long time. I like games more than movies. I enjoy games more than movies. There are lots of reasons why this is the case, but they all kind of distill down to this reality that games are a deeper experience than movies. That's not to say that games are a richer experience, that they're a more emotionally effective experience, that they're a cheaper or more expensive experience, but they're a deeper experience. So I'd like to maybe go deeper in what I mean by a deeper experience. So if we look at a movie is a passive audiovisual experience. It's one where you, as the viewer, are sitting and passively accepting images, music, words that are being shown to you. However you want to look at the scenery, that's how long the director has decided that you ought to look at the scenery. What the characters are saying, the director has decided what they'll say as well as how they're going to say it. You don't have any choice over what's being said or in what order or how quickly actors are saying it. It's all left up to the filmmakers. Same thing with the music. The music is lined up with the visuals in a very tightly controlled way so that you can just sit back and enjoy the medium. Now, that can make for a really good experience. I'm not saying movies are a bad experience. They can be an awesome experience. But it does make for a shallower experience than a game because your mind is going to be less engaged than with most games. And I feel this way also with books, just as a side, that books are a deeper experience than movies as well because you have a little bit more control over how a book proceeds. You can read at different paces. You can stop and think about what's there. And so when we go over to games, we have a lot of those same strengths with games, is that you can look at the scenery if you want to look at the scenery. Not only that, but rather than a frame that the director's choosing to show you, you can see an entire environment. If you like the interior of a space, you can stop and look around at the interior of the space. This is especially true of like first person or any sort of 3D game. But even if you're looking backwards in time at like 2D games, where you are in a level, you can stop and admire the scenery if you want to. And there's really beautiful 2D scenery going way back to like the SNES days. So the visual experience, the audiovisual experience, you're in a greater amount of control in a game. So you can stop and smell the roses figuratively until they invent like a smell-o-vision thing. You can't smell them. But there's lots of people who stop when they're exploring in Skyrim and look around at the scenery and literally look at the flowers. Or stop and just listen to an entire piece play out. When I listen to soundtracks, I much prefer game soundtracks to movie soundtracks for this reason. Movie soundtracks sound formally very disjointed because they are. The formal arrangement of all of the hits and all of the different musical elements that are happening is tied to the visual cues, the visuals, and what's actually happening in the movie. And so when you listen to it absent those visuals, phrasing is weird. Lots of things happen that are very weird, at least for me as a trained musician. And I just don't find it an enjoyable experience. I need to see what's going on as well as hear what's going on when it comes to musical soundtracks for movies, but not so for games. You can hear an entire piece, and people like to do that in Skyrim and Oblivion and Morrowind as well. They'll stop, look at the scenery, listen to a piece of music, and just enjoy that aesthetic experience as they want. Enjoy the experience of like walking down a path and looking at what they want to or exploring what they want to. That's actually a deeper experience than what you get with sitting in a chair and watching images kind of fly into your mind. And the truth is that movies can be an aesthetically overwhelming experience sometimes because you're so out of control of that. Is that fighting robots flying at your head in 3D? It's a very stimulating experience. And this is also why I find the boomer idea that games are hyper-stimulating to be so misguided. The boomers are like the TV generation, and they're very used to passive visual input. That's what they prefer. It's not that games are hyper stimulating, unless you're looking at something like a frantic World of Warcraft raid. But people are not into the stimulation of the World of Warcraft raid. They're into the depth of play. So kids and young people, it's like, what's up with Gen Z? Or they like games because they're a deeper experience. and a lot of times you seek out that deeper experience. At the same time, they're into really shallow like audiovisual experiences like TikTok. It's kind of weird. The mid-range shallow experience of like a cinema experience where you sit still for 3 hours. It's easy to see, oh, they all have ADD because they don't want to sit there. Well, they'll sit there if it's a deep experience. I've learned that as a teacher as well. It's like you can get a kid who has ADD to sit there and practice drums for 2 hours straight with complete focus because it's a deep and engaging experience for him. It's something he really enjoys doing and he's getting something out of it. So games offer that a lot. They offer a really, really deep experience, not just for young people, but for older people. The deeper experience, I think, also gets people's brains working more and makes gamers a little bit more critical of what's going on, I think, than certainly watchers of like CNN, for example. You notice that gamers tend to be really target and be hyper aware of propaganda in their games, whether it's like woke propaganda or it's weird ahistorical stuff like we saw this year. They pick up on that stuff right away because they're more deeply engaged. Because of the depth of the experience, they're more hyper aware of those things being shoved into what is otherwise a different kind of audiovisual medium. They don't passively accept propaganda as much as others. At the same time, I think games have possibly more ability to produce propaganda because of that depth of experience, but very few people are really like willing to go that far with games. Most of the time it's sort of plastered on the surface layer and it doesn't go any deeper than that, and therefore it's very obvious. And so gamers, if I'm looking at gamers as a subculture, they tend to be a lot more aware of how the propaganda is playing out and tend to reject it a lot more. And because of the huge amount of diversity in gaming, they're willing very often to vote with their wallets. I feel like boycotts in gaming tend to work out a lot better than they do in movies and certainly with products, various kinds of products. I think gaming boycotts work good because there's always something else for you to play. There are examples of them really not working well, and I think it's mostly just to do with some portion of the audience doesn't care as much about some other big portion of the audience, like World of Warcraft or something like that. Lots of people make a stink about quitting World of Warcraft, but they seem to just sort of soldier on. People don't really notice the propaganda in World of Warcraft. I noticed this with Dragonflight. They didn't notice like all the gay stuff because they were just engaged with the game. Like they didn't read the quest text. They just clicked accept, went over to the highlighted area and killed what they were supposed to kill. Because what they wanted to do was they wanted to press the buttons, right? They wanted to do the gameplay of the game and didn't really care about the story being pasted over. That's also a strength of the medium in a way, right? Is that people didn't really care about the story in World of Warcraft. They haven't for a long time, and so it just doesn't matter that much. But if you're making a game and you feel like your story is just not top notch, it's okay because the depth of the gameplay can really save a game. At the same time, you could produce deeper story effects, I think, than a film because of the interactive nature of a video game. If you even look at something old like Knights of the Old Republic, which is a very beloved BioWare game from the early 2000s. If you haven't played it, it's probably one of my top 10 games. But there's some great moments in it driven by the fact that you make choices in the game, like not just dark side, light side, like, am I going to use mind control to get some credits out of this guy? But the way that you interact with your characters, there's a part where you can make one character kill another. And if you've gone dark side, that's kind of like a, whoa, I've spent a bunch of hours with that character and I just like murdered her. That's interesting. It has an emotional effect that probably wouldn't have happened in a movie or been as effective as it was in a movie. Same thing with like you can convince Bastila to like switch back to the light side. Those moments are it's not necessarily about the delivery of the lines being good or the graphics being really sharp and realistic. It's just about how long you've spent with those characters produces a deep moment. So a lot of RPGs can give you really deep character moments that you usually don't get outside of books and are not usually present in movies to the same degree because of all of those experiences combining. The gameplay, the story, all that stuff can happen in tandem to produce a better experience than a lot of people realize who haven't had one of those good gaming experiences. Now, there are some downsides to games because of the depth of play. And one of them is that games can be addictive. this has been on the radar for quite a while now, is people compulsively playing video games, particularly MMOs, because MMOs are giving them something that they don't have. They're giving them a rush, they're giving them endorphins, they're giving somebody a bunch of things that they don't have, and therefore they can be highly addictive to the point where the person will shunt their real life responsibilities, sometimes in really disastrous ways, in order to have access to the game. Now, my redirect on that is that, first of all, something can be addictive because it's good, right? If something is really enjoyable, there's a potential for addictive behaviors or maybe compulsive behaviors with that. But looking in our world in 2024, can I really blame people for wanting to spend time in an MMO? There may not be a lot of opportunity to experience the things that an MMO gives you in real life. That is advancement, meaning, social interaction, status. For a lot of people, that's just missing from a modern life. The corporate rat race doesn't really produce them a lot of status. They are not really getting ahead. Their efforts don't yield them something extra. They don't yield them, more social contacts. It doesn't yield them more money. They're existing, and so the game actually gives them an ability to have something that they lack from the modern life, which is an ability to have status, to have meaning. And MMOs deliver that in spades, which is why they have such a high potential for addiction. So is the solution to that to make games like less fun, or to make it so people can't play games? I think the real solution is to make real life have more of those things, because gaming can definitely be a surrogate activity. Not to use Unabomber terminology too much, but here we go. It could be a surrogate activity. It's something you do instead of something which has an actual effect on the world. Rather than starting a business and really affecting your community and yourself and your world, you are running a guild in World of Warcraft. Now, that's not to say anything bad about running a guild in World of Warcraft, but lots of people need that because they simply can't get it within their normal life. Their normal life just doesn't have a strong amount of opportunities for that. So there's the potential for the surrogate activity, but at the same time, I see why that potential exists. It's because we have a materially rich but spiritually poor existence here in the West, and that's definitely been the case for my generation. And I think that's also the case for younger generations like Gen Z. Materially rich but generally spiritually poor experience. So that's the worry about it, but I think a lot of what that worry comes from is the fact that gaming is such a deep and such an interesting and such a engaging experience that it has the potential for addiction. Now, the other thing I want to say is, like, if we're comparing this again to visual medium like movies and TV, movies are an entertainment product, right? So if you're doing it as a leisure activity and watching movies, there's nothing wrong with that. But we have this weird double standard when it comes to games, where somebody having games as a leisure activity is somehow worse than other leisure activities, right? Like, they should be reading books. It's like, if you look at the people who like read a lot of books, they're reading the 40-something women who read bodice rippers all the time. They're not getting better. Like, that's not bettering their life by reading books, right? If you're reading Janet Ivanovich, you're not becoming a better person as a result of reading books. I get that we have all this messaging towards kids, read, and there's nothing wrong with telling kids that it's good to read and wanting kids to read, but the way that you usually get them to read is to read things which they enjoy, and things which they enjoy don't necessarily make them better, right? We're not making kids read, Plato and Thomas Aquinas, right? And people who read Plato and Thomas Aquinas aren't reading it for a leisurely entertainment experience. They're reading it to understand something. They're reading it to gain knowledge, to gain wisdom. That's why they're reading philosophical texts or those difficult to read things. It's not just for pleasure. Reading Harry Potter is not going to make you a smarter and better person unless the level that you were at when you started reading Harry Potter is already very low. So compared to other leisure activities, even books, I don't think there's anything wrong with games. Just know that they're a leisure activity, and the only problem is if you're doing too much of a leisure activity and therefore like not mowing the lawn or not going to work, that's a problem. But people do that with TV. They get home, they watch TV, they don't mow the lawn. So that happens with people as well, with TV and with movies, because leisure activities are fun. We want to do a lot of them. Okay, so I tend to ignore a lot of the boomer complaints about hyper stimulating games and that kind of stuff. To me, I think games are more engaging because they're just a a deeper experience overall, right? That's what I think about it. So when I think about movies versus games in terms of what potential experience they offer, movies can't really compare. It's not that I don't watch movies. I watch movies and I enjoy them. But if I'm comparing the two experiences, games are usually going to offer a better experience. They could offer a worse experience if it's just not a good game. That's the thing too, right? So if we're just looking at the two experiences and comparing them, there's no comparison. Games are more fun. I don't like to turn my mind off. And in fact, when I watch movies, I prefer to watch them at home because there's a pause button. And I'm not pausing the movie because I don't have the ability to focus. You guys have seen me stream, doing write streams where I will write 3,000 words in one sitting. That's focused work, right? I know how to focus. It's that I want to pause and think about something I saw. I want to pause and consider the images that I saw. I don't want a bunch of rapid fire words and images to assault my mind without me being able to pause and really consider them. And that's me turning a movie more into a book, which is to say I'm able to have a deeper experience with a movie with the pause button. So to me, like if I'm comparing the cinema to home, home is usually going to win, even if the cinema has a better overwhelming stimulation experience. It's louder, like maybe bigger visuals. Of course, you can always sit a little closer to your TV, right? There's a lot of things that are really good about the cinema experience. Even if that's better, I probably prefer it at home because I don't feel like I have to disengage to think about something that happened and like focus on my inner self. I can pause it and really think for myself for a minute and then like continue on with the movie. That's something that I tend to want to do a lot. I don't like to turn off my mind and relax for pretty much anything. I realize that's just not who I am. I'm not a super laid back guy in that way. For me, relaxing, I like to relax with a deep experience because most of my day is spent, interacting with children. That's not a super deep experience. It could be a fun and enriching experience and a wonderful experience, but it's not something that's really challenging my mind to grow all the time. It's more like me pretend playing Legos and teaching kids how to phonetically read a word or like do a math problem. That's not super challenging work for me. Leisure stuff needs to be deep, and so that means games get an extra boost over movies, which are something more kind of passive and maybe relaxing, but I don't necessarily want to relax. I want to go deep to let my mind do something that it really needs to do every day, which is to have a deeper experience, even with something that's a leisure experience. So anyway, leave me your thoughts down below in the comment section. I'd love to know, are you a gamer and like games are where it's at? I like games. I don't like to watch movies. I know guys who like watch movies while they play games because the game has boring stuff in it. They're grinding in an MMO to get something, and so they'll put on a movie. They're doing crafting and put a movie on their other monitor. I stopped doing that a while ago, and it changed a lot of my outlook on games. I changed what games I played because I realized a lot of them were just not a very engaging experience on their own. They were shallow. So that changed my thoughts, but I'd like to know, are there people who still do that? And what do you prefer? Do you prefer a good cinema experience? Do you prefer just general movies? Do you just like to have visual media? You prefer passive media? Or do you like to play games? Are games really where it's at? And then also kind of where books fall in this, because I read a lot of books and they're, again, a little bit different experience from those as well. I think books offer a really deep experience for people because you have to be active in pulling the words off the page and reading them and considering them. So I think that has probably the biggest potential depth. But anyway, leave me your thoughts down below. I'd love to read them, and I'll see you all next time. Have a great day.